Any other questions or comments? Yes, at the back, madam.
How would Darwin explain the ethics in humans?
So the question, as you put it, is how did Darwin or how would Darwin? How would Darwin? Okay, well, let's start. Let's go back. Do you want? Yeah.
First of all, there's the question, what do you mean by the ethics of humans? Darwin was a 19th century Englishman, and the prevalent ethical theory at the time, the one that was only reasonable to a 19th century Englishman, was utilitarianism. And so one way to read his book, Descent of Man, where he does talk about the evolution of the moral sense, is to see it as an attempt to try to explain not just any ethical position you might imagine, but why we act according to the principle of utility, maximizing utility. That's one way to approach it. Now, he did have one issue that's an issue for utilitarians, but proponents of many different alternative ethical theories, and that is how we could be as altruistic as we are, and how altruism could come to evolve through evolution by natural selection. In a group of altruists, if there happened to be an egoist born, somebody who wanted to just take advantage of all the care the altruists provide and not do anything themselves for others, their survival and reproductive success might considerably outstrip those of the altruists. Darwin recognized this was a problem, and so he's very concerned with how you would get a group of organisms that are all altruists, how you would maintain it over time. He employed a process, something like group selection, where you have group made up of altruists in competition with a group made up of egoists, and the group of altruists would prevail over the group of egoists. But the problem of how you maintain altruism in a group in large frequencies, if egoists might arise within that group, continued to be a problem for Darwin.
Thank you. Any other? I can go back to any other questions or comments. Sir, do you want to have another?
Was Darwin simply in the right place at the right time, or would evolution, the theory of evolution, have happened much later had Darwin not been around?
But you're going to hurt his feelings if you get the wrong answer. Who wants to? I guess you both might want to comment on that.
Okay, no, I hand it over. Karl Marx famously said of Darwin that the whole theory is just English political economy applied to nature. It's laissez-faire political economy. It's Malthus. It's Adam Smith and the division of labor. Opening up of new markets. Darwin does talk about the economy of nature quite a lot. And he does talk about his theory about how you get evolutionary divergence in an evolutionary tree resembles very much kind of Adam Smithian type thinking. Again, I just mentioned that the Descent of Man is a sort of a story about how utilitarianism evolves in a way. Could the Descent of Man or the Origin of Species have been written by a Frenchman? I don't think so. I think Darwin was, we say Darwin was a man of his times. Darwin was English. Even the connection between natural theology and theology and natural history, that's a very English phenomenon. French natural historians did not invoke God. It's been argued by historians that the difference here is Catholic versus Protestant. In Protestant culture, people are encouraged to go out and fathom the mind of God and understand religious things on their own, whereas in Catholic culture, there's a hierarchy, and you go and you talk to your priest maybe to the bishop, and the bishop consults the Pope on issues like this. And a French scientist who is not a member of the clergy might feel it was completely out of their place to speculate on the mind of God, to employ God's mind in order to make sense of nature. So in many, many respects, I think Darwin was a person of his time and place, and that the origin of species is a very English product. There is the famous co-discovery of evolution by natural selection by not a Russian, not a Frenchman, by another Englishman, Alfred Russel Wallace, which again supports the idea that it supports Marx's idea. Marx didn't say it's wrong because it's English political economy applied to nature. He just thought it wasn't a coincidence.
Do you want to say something? Yeah.
I would no way consider myself to be or to have been a genius or of a supreme intellect, the only one that could have possibly thought of these ideas. Evolution was in the air. In no way was I the first to suggest that animals evolved. Most famously, it came from the scientist, a Frenchman, Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. Unfortunately, he got the way it happens a little bit wrong.
Political economy.
Yes. But there were others. There were many others that were talking about evolution. In fact, my own grandfather, Erasmus Darwin, wrote about the evolution of animals and organisms before I was even born. However, I don't believe this had a direct influence on my own ideas, since I was not very well aware of his writings. But there were others that suggested even natural selection before Alfred Russel Wallace and I did. They suggested them in very small, very hard-to-find writings, but the ideas were in fact out there, almost exclusively in England. There is always, in every great idea, in every great decision, an element of both chance and selection. And so it was perhaps chance that I was at the right place at the right time to travel on the Beagle. But hopefully it was by the suggestion of others, by the education of my mind, by my observation and my understanding of the natural world, that I was the first to really champion the proper idea, the correct idea.
Thank you, sir. It is 8:25, and we're happy to carry on. Are people willing to carry on for another 5 minutes or so, or should we take a break? Okay, let's carry on then. So back to you, sir.
Mr. Darwin, I have a question for you. In your time when this theory came out, were you popular with lay people? Did lay people know about you, or was this only something of the intellectual, and no one else read about you in newspapers or, well, there were no televisions or internet, but there was newspapers?
It's a wonderful question, and one thing that I do pride myself on, to a certain extent, is that I wrote The Origin of Species especially in a language that could be understood by anyone, and a series of arguments that could be understood by anyone. And so the average person in England and on the continent did find out about my ideas very rapidly, both through reading it and through dissemination of ideas in the newspaper, as you suggested. There were later printings of my book, which the first edition sold out on the first day. I was quite proud of. And there were later editions that were printed on incredibly cheap paper that would almost tear when you looked at it. But it made it cheap enough that even laborers, even miners, could chip together a few of their wages, and they would buy a copy to read it, to find out exactly what the idea of natural selection was all about. And so it was an idea that spread rapidly. It was accepted almost immediately by most of the scientists who read it, with a few very major exceptions, and wasn't accepted by the general public right away. But over time, it has been, and hopefully will continue to be.